The millionaire stopped to rest at a gas station after many hours of travel. He walked over to the vending machine, and the sight of a little girl standing up and sitting down repeatedly, as if eagerly waiting for something, piqued his curiosity. As he prepared to leave, the little girl suddenly whispered, "My mom forgot me," which stunned him. And then, the heat in Arizona was not something that could be measured by a number. It was like a slap in the face the moment the door of the Maybach swung open. Daniel Whitmore stepped out of the car. The scorching heat rising from the asphalt pavement penetrated his Italian-made leather shoe soles, seeping into his skin. He loosened the knot of his silk tie, a rare gesture of abandon for a man who always buttoned his shirt to the very top. 15 minutes, Daniel said curtly, signaling to his assistant who was about to follow him out. "I need quiet. Don't bother me while I think." The car door closed, locking in the cool air and the financial reports. Daniel stood alone in the vast parking lot of the rest stop off Interstate 40. The low rumble of truck engines, the crunch of tires on gravel, and the laughter of vacationing families created a chaotic symphony. He adjusted his shirt cuffs and headed toward the row of vending machines. Daniel slid a bill into the slot. The machine whirred, then dispensed an ice-cold bottle of spring water. He pressed the bottle against his forehead, closing his eyes for a few seconds. The cold helped clear his head, but it couldn't dispel the feeling of emptiness creeping into his chest. Around him, fathers carried children on their shoulders, and mothers shared sandwiches. They were loud and dusty, but they had each other. Daniel, the owner of the largest shipping fleet on the West Coast, stood there utterly alone in the crowd. He found a secluded spot under a metal awning where the shadow shielded him from the blazing sun. He leaned against a pillar, twisted the cap off the water bottle, and let his gaze drift aimlessly. That's when he noticed the abnormality. About 10 yards from where he stood at an old isolated wooden table at the edge of the parking lot, there was absolute stillness. A little girl. She was tiny, dwarfed by a faded, oversized gray t-shirt. She sat there, head bowed on the tabletop, her legs dangling without touching the ground, swinging gently in an unconscious rhythm. Next to her was a pink backpack frayed at the corners, which she hugged tightly. It was as if it were her sole possession, or the only shield separating her from this noisy world. Daniel glanced at his watch. 3:15. He took a sip of water, intending to turn away, but a white SUV pulling up stopped him. The moment the tires crunched to a halt nearby, the child instantly reacted. She straightened up. Her small head lifted, her wide eyes focused on the vehicle. Daniel clearly saw the expectation in those eyes. It was bright, fervent, and aching. Her shoulders tensed as if she were ready to jump down and run toward it. The car door opened. A woman stepped out, leading 2 other children. They laughed as they headed toward the restrooms. Not her mother. Lily's small shoulders slumped. She simply retracted, bowing her head back to her original position on the table. A quiet acceptance, a painful ritual that Daniel realized she must have performed countless times that day. 5 minutes later, another truck drove past. She looked up again. Hope. And then she sank down again. Daniel lightly squeezed the plastic water bottle in his hand. The crackling sound of the plastic broke his train of thought. He was a man of processes and logic, and the presence of this child here alone. A sense of unease crept into Daniel's stomach, more bothersome than the desert heat. But then the air horn of a nearby semi-truck blared, dragging him back to reality. 15 minutes were up. He had a meeting in Las Vegas. He couldn't save the whole world, and perhaps the child's parents were just taking a little longer in the convenience store. Daniel sighed, tossing the empty water bottle into the trash. He adjusted his collar and turned to walk toward the waiting Maybach, its engine idling. His footsteps sounded crisp on the hot concrete. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps. A dry gust of wind from the desert swept through, carrying dust and a faint, fragile sound, so delicate it seemed about to vanish into the air, yet sharp as a blade. "My mom forgot me." The chill of the child's words froze Daniel's steps. He spun around, his gaze locked onto the small back hunched over the gray wooden table. The child hadn't spoken to anyone. She was talking to herself like a mantra to soothe the mounting fear in her heart. A feeling of intense distress washed over Daniel. He raised his hand, giving a decisive signal toward the Maybach wait. The chauffeur nodded, turning off the engine. Daniel returned to the vending machine, his long, slender fingers accustomed to signing multi-million-dollar contracts, now fumbling with loose change to buy a bottle of water and a pre-packaged meat sandwich. He walked toward the wooden table. The sound of his Italian leather heels clicked deliberately on the concrete, loud enough to announce his presence but not so loud as to startle her. But he was mistaken. The moment his shadow fell over the table, obscuring the last patch of sunlight, the child flinched. She recoiled as quickly as a small squirrel encountering a predator clutching the pink backpack close to her chest like a shield. Her eyes widened, full of wariness and fear, staring intently at the strange man. Daniel paused. He didn't advance further. He placed the water bottle in the sandwich wrapper at the far end of the table, maintaining enough distance for her to feel safe. Then he slowly pulled out the opposite chair and sat down. He didn't stare at her, but let his eyes glide over her dust-smudged face, and her lips cracked from thirst. "Have you been sitting here long?" Daniel asked, his voice low and calm, as if inquiring about the weather. The girl didn't answer immediately. She looked at him then, at the water bottle, which was beaded with cold condensation. Her throat moved as she swallowed audibly and painfully. 3 hours, sir." The answer was a tiny squeak, almost swallowed by the wind. Daniel frowned slightly but quickly hid his expression. 3 hours under the scorching Arizona sun. He pushed the water bottle forward a bit more lightly, tapping his finger on the cap. "That's for you. Drink it. By the way, what's your name?" What happened next rendered Daniel speechless. The girl didn't snatch the water immediately. She stared at the bottle, then lifted her large, round eyes to him. In her gaze there was no gratitude, but rather scrutiny and expectation. A heartbreakingly subservient expectation. "Lily, sir. May I drink it?" The gentle question fell amid the noisy chaos of the rest stop. Daniel felt like someone had just squeezed his heart. A child, parched, had to ask permission to drink water. He nodded, trying to keep his face expressionless. Only upon receiving that nod did the small, trembling hand reach out. She grasped the water bottle, struggled to twist off the cap with weak hands, and then brought it to her mouth, taking small, cautious sips. She drank slowly, her eyes still flicking toward Daniel, as if she feared the privilege would be revoked if she drank too quickly. The afternoon shadow deepened to a purplish hue. The high-powered lights began to flicker on with a dry click, casting a dismal yellow glow over the parking lot. Most families had left, leaving only a few long-haul trucks parked for the night. The worry became more evident in Lily's eyes. She kept looking back toward the road leading to the interstate, where darkness was gradually swallowing everything. "Do you remember any phone numbers?" Daniel asked. "Your mother's, your father's, or anyone's?" Lily shook her head. She put the water bottle down nervously, picking at the hem of her threadbare shirt. "Mom said kids don't need phones," she whispered. "She told me to sit here quietly, not to run around, not to bother other people. If I'm not good, she won't come back." Daniel clenched his fists beneath the table. Those strict rules weren't meant to protect the child. They were meant to constrain her, to make her invisible and less troublesome. "Where did your mother go?" "She went to buy things. With Mike." Lily lowered her face, her voice fading. "Maybe she's just busy, sir." She looked up at the dark road, her eyes strangely hollow. "Last time, at the gas station in Nevada, Mom also left me waiting until dark before picking me up. She said she forgot the time." The statement came out gently, as calmly as if she were recounting an everyday occurrence. No complaint, no anger, just a resignation that had become a habit. A cruel routine repeated often enough that being forgotten for hours was deemed her fault and being picked up was a favor. Daniel looked at the small child before him, then out into the absolute darkness engulfing the desert. He understood that her mother wasn't coming back, at least not tonight, and he knew he couldn't simply get back into his car and leave. Daniel pressed the decline button on his phone, shoving the vibrating device deep into his suit pocket. He pulled out his secondary phone, reserved for emergencies, and dialed James's number. The other end picked up after the first ring. James Daniel said, his eyes still fixed on the huddled child in front of him. "I need you at the Mile 40 rest stop right now. Bring the security team and call lawyer Harrison. I want emergency guardianship papers prepared immediately." "Is the boss in trouble?" James's voice held a note of concern. "No, but I'm about to get into a big one." "And James, don't call the local police yet. I don't want the girl thrown into foster care tonight." Daniel hung up. He looked at Lily. The darkness had swallowed the parking lot, turning the lampposts into weak islands of light in a black ocean. The night desert wind began to howl, bringing a bone-chilling cold that was the complete opposite of the midday heat. A loud, metallic clang echoed from the convenience store. The gas station attendant was pulling down the security gate. Clang, screech. Lily jumped. She curled up, pulling her knees close to her chest chin, resting on her knees. She looked toward the closing door, where the last light was being narrowed. That was where she had still hoped her mother would emerge with a soda and an apologetic smile. But now it was closed, a blunt rejection of reality. Daniel approached her. His shadow stretched long on the ground, touching the legs of her chair. "Lily," Daniel called softly. She didn't look up, only tilted her head slightly, her eyes still fixed on the darkness beyond the highway. "We can't stay here anymore," Daniel continued, his voice firmer. "Your mother won't be coming tonight. Mom said to wait." Lily whimpered, her voice trembling, blending with the wind. "If I leave, she won't find me." "Does your mother have a phone?" "Yes, sir. Then I'll leave a message for her. I promise she'll know where you are." Daniel held out his hand palm open toward her, an invitation, but also a silent command. Lily looked at the large hand of the stranger. Then she looked at the thick darkness surrounding them. The fear of being abandoned alone in the desert began to overcome the fear of disobeying her mother. But her hands were still gripping the edge of the wooden table, her knuckles white from the effort. She shook her head fiercely. "I can't leave. Mom told me to sit here, right in this spot," the heartbreaking insistence. Daniel realized that to this child, the decaying wooden table wasn't just a seat. It was the only anchor holding her to the hope of family. Leaving it meant accepting that she had been discarded. Daniel sighed. He pulled back his hand and quickly walked toward the gas station counter. The employee locking the last padlock looked at him with curiosity mixed with annoyance at being bothered after closing time. "Hey, buddy," Daniel took out his wallet, pulled out $200 bills, and slipped them into the employee's shirt pocket. "I need to borrow a pen and a piece of paper, and I need you to tape it to the window glass in the brightest spot." The attendant looked at the money, then at Daniel, and shrugged. "Here's the pen. Just don't write anything crazy." Daniel rested the paper on the lid of the trash can, writing quickly in large, clear, decisive script, "Lily is with a safe person. Call this number immediately, 702-555-0199. Daniel." He taped the paper to the window glass right under the awning light. The white paper stood out against the dark glass like a small lighthouse. Daniel returned to Lily. He pointed to the paper. "See, if your mom comes back, she'll see that paper first. She'll know to call me to pick you up. You don't have to sit here in the cold anymore." Lily squinted at the white paper. She might not have been able to read all the words, but she understood the meaning of the action. It was a guarantee, a link to replace the wooden table. Just then, two sleek black SUVs slowly pulled into the parking lot, their headlights sweeping back and forth like the eyes of nocturnal animals. James stepped out of the first car, followed by two burly bodyguards. They didn't approach immediately, but spread out 10 yards away, forming an invisible protective circle around Daniel and Lily. Their presence was silent, but heavy, completely isolating the two from the potential dangers of the desert night. Daniel gave James a slight nod, then turned to Lily. This time he didn't offer his hand, but lowered his voice, speaking like a heart-to-heart between two men and a young lady. "My car's right there. It's cool and has soda. You can sit by the window to watch the road. If we see your mom's car, we'll stop right away." Lily looked at the paper on the window one more time. Then she looked at the wooden table. She gently stroked the dusty surface a silent farewell. She slowly released her grip on the table edge. Her small body swayed as she stood up. Her legs were stiff from sitting motionless for over 6 hours. She stumbled, nearly falling. Daniel reacted instantly, reaching out to support her back, but he stopped 1 centimeter from her clothes, not quite touching her, allowing her to regain her balance on her own. He respected her personal space and the wounded pride of the abandoned child. Lily bent down to pick up her backpack and slung it over her shoulder. The backpack was nearly half her size, weighing down her thin shoulders. She walked haltingly, following Daniel toward the Maybach. Gravel crunched under their feet. The night wind chilled her face. After a few steps, Lily suddenly stopped. She turned her head back toward the empty wooden table, isolated under the yellow light. It was a look of separation. Not separation from an object, but separation from the innocent belief that her mother would always return. Her eyes held a sorrow far older than her 7 years. She knew or sensed that she would never return to that seat again. "Let's go, honey," Daniel said softly, shielding her from the wind with his broad back. Lily turned away, quickening her pace toward the car. The chauffeur opened the back door. The blast of cold air conditioning carried the scent of expensive leather and a faint cologne. A world utterly different from the dust and heat outside. Lily hesitated for a moment, then climbed into the car. She didn't sit in the middle seat, the most comfortable spot. She huddled against the right window, making herself as small as possible, her legs curled up, not daring to touch the floor mat, clutching her backpack to her chest. She was afraid of staining this world, or perhaps she was afraid this world would swallow her. The car door closed with a solid thud, completely cutting off the howling wind outside. The interior was utterly silent. The car began to move, smoothly. Lily pressed her face against the cold window. Her large, round eyes were fixed on the scene receding behind them. The rest stop shrank to a speck of light, then disappeared completely around a bend, swallowed by the desert darkness. Daniel looked through the rearview mirror. He saw Lily still maintaining that posture, still as a statue. But then he saw her small, dirt-smudged hand quickly wipe across her cheek. A streak of moisture spread on the window where her breath fogged the glass, the first tear of the day. She was crying, not wailing or throwing a tantrum, but a single tear falling in the silence of acceptance. She had left her childhood at that wooden table. The door closed, but Lily's past remained open. Could the kind gentleman Daniel really save her, or was this just the beginning of a darker secret? Join us as we continue this captivating story. The Maybach glided smoothly through the gates of the Mirage Hotel, stopping in front of the brightly lit main lobby. Daniel stepped out first, extending his hand toward Lily, who was huddled in the corner of the car. She looked at his hand, then down at her dusty canvas shoes, hesitating for a long moment before daring to step onto the glossy marble floor. The private elevator door opened onto the top floor, the presidential suite. When Daniel swiped the key card and pushed the door open, Lily froze right at the threshold. The room was vast and overwhelming. The ceiling was high, with a crystal chandelier casting warm golden light reflecting on the oak-paneled walls. A plush white wool rug stretched from the door to the velvet-covered sofa in the center of the room. Lily stood rooted to the spot. Her eyes were wide, not with delight but with apprehension. She looked down at the pristine white rug, then down at her worn, tattered shoes, whose stitching had come undone, revealing the black lining. She took a small step back, as if her presence was a stain on the perfection of the place. "Come on in," Daniel said, removing his jacket and draping it over the armchair armrest. "Make yourself at home." Lily did not enter. She bent down low, fumbling to untie her shoelaces. Her small hands wrestled with the tangled knots. She took off her old canvas shoes and placed them neatly outside the door, revealing white socks that had turned a dingy gray with worn heels and a large hole in the big toe. She stepped inside, but not onto the rug. She walked along the edge of the wall, placing her tentative bare feet on the cold stone floor, trying to make herself as small as possible so as not to touch anything expensive. Daniel watched the scene, a knot tightening in his throat. He wanted to say, "Just walk on the rug, it can be washed." But he knew those words were meaningless against the fear deeply ingrained in the child's subconscious. The doorbell rang. The room service food cart was wheeled in. The smell of creamy pumpkin soup, perfectly grilled steak, and toasted garlic butter bread instantly filled the large space. The moment the silver cloche was lifted, a loud gurgle sounded from Lily's direction. Her face flushed scarlet. She quickly clutched her stomach, bowing her head as if she had committed a grave offense. It's normal to be hungry. Daniel pulled out a chair, lightly patting the soft cushion. Come here. We'll talk after you eat. Lily gingerly climbed onto the oversized chair. Her legs dangled, not touching the floor. A sumptuous feast was laid out on the table. But Lily didn't pick up a fork or a knife. She looked at Daniel, waiting. Daniel picked up his fork and began eating a bite of salad. Only then did Lily dare to break off a tiny piece of bread and bring it to her mouth. She chewed very slowly, making no sound. Her eyes were not on the food, but secretly observing Daniel after every swallow, like a small animal sneaking a meal in a predator's territory, eating while constantly watching for danger. Is it good? Daniel asked, trying to break the tension. Yes, it is, sir, she replied, holding the soup spoon with both hands, shaking slightly as she brought it to her mouth, carefully positioning her hand underneath to catch even a single drop before it could fall onto the white tablecloth. Daniel sighed internally. He took out his tablet, pretending to check work emails so she wouldn't feel supervised. He tilted the screen slightly, glancing at her reflection in the dark window glass. What he saw made his heart clench. The moment Daniel looked down at the screen, Lily's hand speed changed completely. She swiftly snatched half of the remaining meat sandwich from the plate. She looked around furtively, then pulled out a paper napkin, wrapped the sandwich carefully, and pressed it tight to make it smaller. She quickly glanced at Daniel again. Seeing him still engrossed in his computer, she quickly stuffed the wrapped sandwich deep into the pocket of her oversized jacket. She lightly patted the pocket to ensure it didn't bulge, too obviously, then returned to her bowl of soup, continuing to eat small, quiet spoonfuls as if nothing had happened. That action was not greed. It was survival instinct. Daniel placed the tablet down on the table, the slight impact causing Lily to jump her spoon, freezing in midair. I'm full, sir. She quickly put the spoon down, even though the bowl of soup was still half full. Eat more. There's plenty. No, thank you, sir. I'm afraid I'll cost you too much money. Daniel looked straight into her eyes that were clear but held the worries of an adult burdened by the cost of living. Lily, Daniel said slowly, his voice deepening. I am very wealthy. You could eat the whole hotel and I wouldn't go broke, so don't worry about the money. Lily blinked, her expression relaxing slightly, but her hand instinctively rested on the jacket pocket where the sandwich was hidden. My mom said, our family's very poor. We have to save money. Eat today, think about tomorrow. If we eat everything, we'll be hungry tomorrow. Did your mother often let you go hungry? Lily lowered her face, fiddling with the edge of the tablecloth. Not always, sir. Just when Mike loses at cards, Mom usually forgets to buy food. On those days, drinking water keeps me full. Daniel felt a surge of anger burning like hot coals in his chest. Mike. Losing at cards, forgetting to buy food. The pieces of the tragic puzzle were coming together. A 7-year-old child who knew how to drink water to stave off hunger, knew how to hide food for later, and knew how to be quiet and gentle so as not to bother the adults. That wasn't good behavior. That was the consequence of cruel neglect. Daniel picked up his phone, quickly tapping out a message to James. I need her complete medical history, school records, and family files. Tonight, not a single detail missed. He pressed send, his finger striking the screen hard as if trying to smash this injustice. Lily was finished eating. She didn't jump down from her chair and run off to play like other children. She voluntarily tidied her dishes, stacking them neatly, placing the knife and fork tidily beside them. She even used a napkin to wipe away tiny breadcrumbs scattered on the table. After doing all that, she stood up, hands clasped in front of her stomach. "Sir, may I use the bathroom?" Daniel closed his eyes for a moment, trying to swallow the lump of resentment in his throat. "The bathroom is over there. Just use it freely, you don't need to ask my permission. Clean towels are on the shelf." Lily nodded, backing away a few steps before turning toward the bathroom, still tiptoeing. The bathroom door closed. Daniel got up and went out onto the balcony. He pulled out a cigarette pack and lit one. Smoke curled up, merging with the nightlights of the town below. He looked down at the tiny cars, small as toys, and the feeling of helplessness from 12 years ago rushed back. That day, he had also stood on a high balcony like this, looking down at the city and wondering where his daughter was. Was she hungry? Was she cold? And now he stood here with another child, a child who was learning to survive in her own home. Fate truly had a twisted sense of humor. The faint sound of running water from the bathroom cut short his thoughts. It wasn't the sound of a flushing toilet, nor the rushing sound of a shower. It sounded like small drops, very quiet, as if the person inside was trying to limit the noise as much as possible. Daniel extinguished his cigarette and went back into the room. He approached the bathroom door. The door wasn't fully closed, leaving a small gap. The warm golden light spilled out into the dark hallway. Daniel intended to knock and ask if she needed help, but the sight through the gap froze him. Lily was standing in front of the large mirror. Her thin body was exposed, but the sight that horrified Daniel wasn't malnutrition. She had removed her outer jacket, revealing bruises and a few scrapes on her body. Daniel stepped back, leaning against the wall. The cold from the wall seeped through his suit, but it wasn't as chilling as the feeling in his heart right now. Those bruises were not from falling. They were located where only an adult hand, grasping tightly, pulling or shoving, could inflict them. He backed away a little because he could no longer bear the sight before him. The bathroom door opened. Warm steam filled the hallway, carrying the gentle scent of lavender soap. Lily stepped out, her wet brown hair plastered to her forehead, dripping water onto the wooden floor. She was wearing light blue pajamas printed with white clouds that the hotel staff had hurriedly purchased from the lobby store. The clothes were oversized, the sleeves covering her fingertips, making her look like she was swimming in the soft fabric. She bowed her head, her hands twisting together, murmuring, "I'm done, sir." Daniel stood leaning against the wall, trying to clear the image of the bruises he had just seen. He smiled, the most forced smile he'd ever managed. "That's your bed. Sleep well." Lily looked up at the vast, king-sized bed with thick duvet blankets. She hesitated for a moment before climbing up. Instead of lying in the middle of the plush bed, she scooted over to the farthest edge, curling up like a kitten seeking a hiding spot. Her hands still clutched the old frayed jacket, her precious possession, with the hidden piece of bread, using it as a comfort pillow instead of the hotel's soft goose-down pillows. "Aren't you going to use the blanket?" Daniel asked when he saw her huddled on top of the covers. "No, sir. The blanket is too white. My feet are dirty." Daniel walked over, gently grasping the edge of the blanket and covering her. "Blankets are meant to be used, Lily. If it gets dirty, the housekeeper will change it tomorrow. Go to sleep, don't worry about a thing." Lily lay perfectly still under the warm blanket, only her large round eyes visible. She looked at Daniel for a moment, then slowly closed them, overcome by exhaustion. The room fell silent. Only the faint hum of the air conditioning remained. Daniel walked around, checking the windows and drawing the curtains to block the neon light of the town. As he passed the bathroom door, his eyes inadvertently stopped at the small marble counter next to the sink. There, lying alone between a lotion jar and a swan-folded hand towel, was a small metallic object, a silver bracelet. It was old, tarnished black, in the crevices, the chain so thin it seemed it would break with a slight tug. Perhaps Lily had taken it off before showering to keep it safe. Daniel picked it up. It was featherlight, a cheap piece of jewelry often found in roadside souvenir shops. He planned to put it in her backpack for her in the morning, but as his thumb brushed the back of the small round metal plate, he felt raised indentations. He brought the bracelet closer under the soft yellow light of the nightstand lamp. He squinted. Engraved on the worn silver surface was a tiny logo, a stylized flame nested within a heart. Below it was a meticulously hand-etched inscription, the fine lines suggesting artisanal work, not machine-made, for C. Daniel's heart skipped a beat. That flame image. He had drawn it. He had personally sketched it on a napkin in a San Francisco cafe 12 years ago. It was the logo for the Catherine's Hope Project, the foundation he secretly established to support medical care for poor children at St. Jude's Hospital in Nevada. Catherine, his older sister, the sister who ran away one rainy night 30 years ago, leaving him a letter of apology and a lifetime of gnawing regret. Daniel turned on his phone flashlight, his hand trembling slightly. He took 5 consecutive photos from different angles, focusing intently on the inscription and the logo. He immediately sent them to Marcus, the private investigator and head of intelligence for the Whitmore Group. Verify the origin of this item. Immediately. I need to know who owned it. He turned off the phone, threw it onto the sofa, and sank into the armchair opposite the bed. He looked at Lily. The child was sleeping soundly, her breathing, even her long lashes, gently closed. In sleep, her face relaxed, losing the prematurely weary look. Daniel tried to recall Catherine's features. Hazel brown eyes. Yes. Slightly curly hair. Yes. But millions of children worldwide shared those traits. Daniel rubbed his temple. It could just be a coincidence. This bracelet might have been bought secondhand, or maybe her mother found it. 10 minutes passed. Time in the room seemed to condense. The phone on the side table vibrated violently, the rattling sound on the glass shattering the heavy silence. Daniel snatched it before the ring could sound. Talk, his voice was hoarse. Mr. Whitmore Marcus's voice came through urgent and with a rare hint of surprise. I checked the foundation archives. This bracelet, it wasn't sold commercially. Get to the point, Marcus. It was part of a limited batch of 50 custom-made pieces you commissioned from an Italian artisan 12 years ago. You gave them to head nurses and doctors who made special contributions to the St. Jude's project. But what there was one you kept. You said you wanted to hand engrave the name on it yourself, waiting for the day you found her. The file note reads, piece number 50, for C. You engraved that C right, boss. Daniel felt his blood turn to ice. Yes, he remembered. That night he had sat in his office using a stylus to etch the soft silver. The letter C. Catherine. He had sent it along with a private detective to the last address where Catherine was suspected of living. The detective reported handing an envelope directly to a woman matching the description, but she vehemently denied being Catherine Whitmore and returned the envelope. Or did she keep it? Daniel looked down at the bracelet in his hand. It wasn't a flea market find. It was a memento, a message. The single link he had cast into the void with the faint hope it would reach his lost sister. And now it was here. On the counter of a child abandoned at a rest stop, Marcus Daniel said, his voice so cold it silenced the other end of the line. Pull up her mother's file immediately. Mother's name, grandmother's name. I need the grandmother's birth name. I'm on it, boss. The file James sent... Wait a moment. Here we go. Mother's name is Sarah Miller. Grandmother passed away 2 years ago. Birth name. Marcus paused. The sound of typing stopped completely. What was her name? Daniel snapped. Catherine Miller. But her maiden name on the old birth certificate in Oregon is Catherine Whitmore. Daniel slowly lowered the phone. He didn't need to hear anything else. He disconnected the call and let the phone drop onto the carpet. He looked at Lily. The child curled up on the bed was not a stranger, not a random charity case. The blood flowing through her veins was his blood, Whitmore blood. Daniel squeezed the silver bracelet tightly in his hand, squeezing so hard that the sharp edges cut into his skin, but he felt nothing but the shockwave rattling his entire mind. He stood up, approached the bed, his shadow falling over Lily. He examined every feature on her face, the slightly high nose, the broad forehead. It was Catherine, his sister, and Sarah, the woman who abandoned her in the desert, was his niece, Catherine's daughter. Lily was his great-niece. Anger erupted, no longer the indignation of an outsider, but the fury of a pack leader discovering his young had been attacked by wolves. He bent down, reaching out to touch Lily's cheek, but recoiled. He feared his anger would wake her. Daniel turned, walked out of the bedroom, closing the door gently but firmly. He went into the living room, picked up the landline phone, and called James. "Prepare the car, and call the best team of lawyers on the West Coast. We are going to the police precinct tomorrow morning. Is the boss planning to sue them for child abandonment?" "No," Daniel growled, staring out the window into the darkness. "I'm taking the child back, at any cost, and I'm going to make those people regret the day they were born." The bright sunlight of the desert morning streamed through the thick curtains, cutting the room into sharp streaks of light and shadow. But it wasn't enough to dispel the coldness that still permeated the space. Daniel sat at the desk, hands clasped, staring at the black screen of the tablet in front of him. He had been sitting like that for 2 hours without sleep. The room door burst open. James entered, bringing with him a rush of urgency. He placed a USB drive and a thick file folder on the desk, the sound of paper hitting wood, sharp and dry. "Everything's here," James said, his voice low, lacking his usual composure. Video extracted from the gas station, and the complete files on Sarah Miller and the new husband, Mike. Daniel said nothing. He plugged the USB into the computer and opened the video file. The screen displayed grainy black and white footage from the gas station security camera. Timestamp 14:35 yesterday. An old dust-covered SUV pulled up to pump number 4. The passenger door opened. A woman stepped out, Sarah. She looked worn out, her scraggly blonde hair tied back, wearing a cheap tank top. She walked into the convenience store, buying a pack of cigarettes and 2 sodas. Meanwhile, in the driver's seat, the man named Mike rolled down the window, rested his arm on the doorframe, and puffed clouds of smoke. He never once turned his head to look at the back seat. 2 minutes later, Sarah returned. She opened the back door, intending to toss the bag inside. Daniel held his breath. This was the defining moment. On screen, Sarah paused. She stood still for about 2 seconds, staring at the empty back seat. She knew Lily wasn't there. She looked up, glancing around quickly, but she didn't call out. Her mouth never opened to shout the child's name. Then her eyes met the rearview mirror, where Mike was glaring at her through the glass, his face impatient and urging her on. The next action was so swift and brutal that Daniel felt like he'd been punched in the chest. Sarah didn't hesitate. She threw the bag onto the back seat and slammed the door shut. She walked around to the passenger seat and climbed in. The SUV roared, speeding out of the gas station, leaving a cloud of dust and her own daughter stranded in the desert. It wasn't an accident. It was a choice, a calculated abandonment. "Turn it off," Daniel said, his voice trembling with suppressed rage. James snapped the laptop shut with a loud thump. Daniel reached for the personnel file. He quickly flipped through the densely typed pages. $60,000 in gambling debt, minor insurance fraud convictions. Mike had previously been investigated for domestic battery, but the victim, Sarah, withdrew the complaint. A typical dirty record of those living on the fringes of society due to laziness and greed. But the last page was what Daniel was looking for. The family tree. Mother's name, Sarah Miller. Grandmother's name, Catherine Miller. Grandmother's birth name, Catherine Whitmore, born in San Francisco, ran away from home in 1992. The black and white letters danced before Daniel's eyes, but their meaning was clearer than ever. Catherine, his sister. The one who left because she couldn't tolerate the pressure from their overbearing father, the one Daniel had promised to find at any cost. She had lived a difficult life, changed her name, had a child, and died in poverty without ever reaching out. And now, her granddaughter, the last remaining blood relative, was in the bedroom next door, with bruises on her shoulders and a piece of bread hidden in her jacket pocket. Lily was not a stranger. She was family, a responsibility, a debt Daniel had to repay his sister. Rage exploded in Daniel's chest, no longer the indignation of an outsider, but the wrath of an alpha animal discovering its young had been torn apart by wolves. He jumped up, knocking the file folder onto the floor. The papers scattered across the room like white snow. "Prepare the helicopter," Daniel roared, turning to James with fiery eyes. "We are going to the Clark County Sheriff's Department right now. I want Whitmore's best legal team there within an hour. No negotiation, no settlement. I'm going to crush those people." "What are you planning to do?" Boss James asked, though he already knew the answer. "I'm taking the child back, and I'm putting those two scoundrels behind bars to rot." In the next room, the loud noise startled Lily awake. She tiptoed out of bed, walking barefoot toward the slightly ajar bedroom door. She peered through the gap. She saw the kind gentleman standing in the middle of the living room, papers strewn on the floor. His face was flushed, veins bulging in his neck, his eyes terrifying like a wild beast, preparing to launch into a fight to the death. She had never seen an adult so angry without feeling afraid. She stepped back, intending to hide in the closet as she always did when Mike raged. But Daniel turned around. He caught Lily's fearful gaze through the door crack. His face instantly transformed. The anger vanished as quickly as it came replaced by a strange, gentle, and firm determination. He strode quickly toward the bedroom door, pushing it gently open. He walked over to Lily, kneeling on one knee on the cold wood floor to bring his eyes level with hers. He didn't touch her immediately, only reached out to tuck the messy lock of hair obscuring her view behind her ear. "I'm sorry for making noise," Daniel said, his voice deep and solid without a trace of tremor. "Are you awake?" Lily nodded, her eyes still looking at the mess of papers outside. "Who were you angry at, or were you angry at me?" No, Daniel shook his head, his gaze deep in her brown eyes, the exact eyes of his sister Catherine. "I'm angry at the people who hurt you, and today I'm going to take care of that." He grasped her small shoulders, looking directly into her eyes as a vow. "Get dressed, Lily. Put on your prettiest outfit. Today we are going to meet some people. We are going to demand justice for you, and I promise you from now on you will never have to hide bread in your pocket again. Never." They moved quickly, and in the car, Daniel pondered a series of upcoming situations. 30 minutes passed and the car stopped at the police station. The fury has erupted. When a billionaire uses money and power to confront evil, how will justice be served? Please comment below to let me know if your prediction matches the story's development. Thank you for following the story. The glass double doors of the Clark County Sheriff's Department swung open. The air inside was heavy with the stale smell of old coffee and damp paper, a stark contrast to the crisp air outside. Daniel Whitmore walked in his back straight, carrying the same imposing presence as when he entered a board meeting. His hand firmly clasped Lily's small, cold hand. Their arrival was like throwing a stone into a still pond. The general noise, the clicking of typewriters, and minor arguments abruptly ceased. All eyes turned toward them. A man in an expensive Italian suit leading a child in a brand new floral dress, but with a face pale with fear, an odd and powerful combination. In the waiting area, corner, a dramatic scene was reaching its climax. "Oh my God, I'm going insane, my daughter. How can I live without her? Sarah Miller." Lily's mother was sobbing dramatically on the shoulder of a young police officer. She wore a thin, bright pink sweater, and her heavy makeup was smeared by tears, creating long black streaks under her eyes. Her crying was loud and shrill, yet her eyes were dry, constantly flicking around to see if anyone was paying attention to her performance. Standing next to her was Mike, the new husband. He wore a faded rock band t-shirt, arms crossed over his chest, his foot tapping rhythmically on the tiled floor. He wasn't looking at his wife or the officer. He was looking at his watch, his face grimacing as if his stepdaughter's disappearance was interfering with an important card game. "Hey, are we done with the statement yet?" "This is taking too long," Mike snapped. Just then, Sarah's eyes met Lily's. She froze. Her crying stopped completely as if someone had instantly turned down the volume knob. Sarah shrieked, her tone switching from feigned distress to fabricated joy with startling speed. She shoved the police officer aside, lunging toward Lily with wide-open arms, her bright red nails reaching out like claws. "There you are. I was worried sick. Why did you wander off like that?" Lily stood stock still. When she saw her mother rushing toward her, her first instinct was not to run to her embrace. She yanked her hand back quickly, retreating, her entire body pressed tight against Daniel's leg, her hands gripping his tailored trousers. She trembled violently, burying her face into Daniel's thigh, refusing to look at her mother. That action spoke volumes. No child is that terrified of their mother after being lost, unless mother is synonymous with punishment. Sarah stopped mid-lunge, her hands suspended in the air. She felt the scrutiny of those around them begin to focus on her. The embarrassment made her face flush red. "What in the world are you doing?" Sarah pressed closer, her sweet tone gone, replaced by a hissed threat. "Get over here right now. Are you trying to make me look bad?" She reached out, intending to grab Lily's wrist and pull her away, but she didn't touch the child. Daniel took a step forward. He positioned his body between Lily and Sarah, forming an impassable solid wall. He said nothing, just stood there looking down at Sarah with eyes that were chillingly cold. James and the two bodyguards instantly advanced. They didn't push or shove, they simply interposed themselves gently but firmly, separating Sarah and Mike, forcing them to step back. "Hey, who are you people? Are you kidnapping my kid?" Mike lunged forward, trying to act the tough guy. He rolled up his sleeve, revealing a patchy tattoo on his bicep. "I advise you to remain calm," James said, his voice even, "unless you want to be handcuffed for disorderly conduct right here at the police station." The door to the inner office opened. The precinct chief stepped out, followed by two lawyers in black suits carrying leather briefcases. Mike started to swear, but the lawyer's sharp look made him swallow the curse. He recognized the scent of money and power emanating from this group, something he would never dare cross. "Please, everyone, come inside," the chief said curtly. "We need to talk privately." Daniel looked down. He didn't lead Lily anymore. He slipped his hands under her armpits and lifted her. Lily was featherlight in his arms, like a small, broken-winged bird. She wrapped her arms tightly around his neck, buried her face in his shoulder, and squeezed her eyes shut. She didn't want to see her mother, didn't want to see Mike. She just wanted to hide in this one safe place. That public act of protection made Sarah blanch. She took a step back, hand flying to her mouth. She wasn't foolish. She realized the man holding her daughter wasn't a good Samaritan who happened to find a lost child. He was declaring war, and he was holding her daughter as a trophy or as living proof. "Let's go," Daniel whispered to Lily, patting her back gently to reassure her. The group moved into the enclosed office. The door shut behind them with a loud thud, cutting off all curious noise outside. The room immediately became cramped and suffocating. Daniel pulled out a chair and sat Lily down beside him. He didn't let her sit alone across from her. Parents. He sat right next to her, forming a solid alliance. Across from them, Sarah huddled her hands, twisting in embarrassment. Mike slouched, crossing one leg over the other, trying to appear nonchalant, but his shifty eyes betrayed his fear. Daniel looked directly into Sarah's eyes, then shifted to Mike. His gaze held no more pity or social politeness. It was sharp as a razor, stripping away all the pretense of the two people opposite him. He slowly removed the expensive Patek Philippe watch from his wrist, placing it with a clear clack on the wooden table. The sound resonated like a judge's gavel, an assertion of authority, a declaration of war that he knew he would be the one to finish. "All right," Daniel said, his voice low and firm. "Now we talk about the price of freedom." The ticking of the Patek Philippe watch on the table resonated steadily, slowly but distinctly in the thick atmosphere. Lawyer Harrison placed a thick stack of files on the table. The sound of paper hitting wood was a dry thump like the closing of a coffin lid. Sarah glanced at the stack of papers, swallowing hard, her throat moving with difficulty. Mike was different. He leaned back in his chair, propped one foot on his knee, chewing gum audibly with an air of indifference. "What do you want?" Mike sneered. "If you're going to give me a moral lecture, spare me. We're just poor parents working hard, a little distracted." "Is that illegal?" Daniel didn't answer. He gave a slight nod to James. The large TV screen mounted on the wall lit up. The video from the gas station began to play. The room fell silent. Only the faint hum of the projector could be heard. The black and white images clearly showed Sarah stepping out of the car, Sarah looking into the empty back seat, Sarah closing the door, and the car speeding away. That wasn't distraction. Daniel said, his voice icy. That was abandonment. Sarah jumped up, her face flushed. "No. I thought she was asleep on the floor. I swear Daniel raised his hand, cutting her off. He reached into his inner suit pocket, pulling out a small silver object. He tossed it gently onto the glossy tabletop. The bracelet slid, spinning a few times before stopping right in front of Sarah. Sarah's eyes locked onto it. Her already red face suddenly turned paper white. She recognized it. She had seen it on her mother's wrist for so many years. The memento that Catherine always treasured like a relic, the one Sarah once tried to sell for cigarette money, only to receive a fiery slap from her mother. She slowly looked up at Daniel. This time, she looked closer. Those brown eyes, that high forehead, and the aura of power radiating from him. The drunken stories her mother used to tell about her wealthy younger brother in San Francisco flooded back into her memory. "You," Sarah stammered, her voice trembling. "You are—" Daniel braced his hands on the table, leaning forward, his shadow engulfing Sarah. "Catherine was my sister," he stressed each word. "And you threw my niece out on the street like a bag of trash." Sarah gasped, speechless. She slumped back into the chair like a puppet with cut strings. But Mike was not. He lunged forward, his eyes flashing with unconcealed greed. He glanced at the expensive watch, then at Daniel's suit, and finally at Lily, who was sitting silently beside him. He realized that he was sitting on a gold mine, not a burden. He lowered his voice, winking at Daniel with blatant audacity. "Hey, buddy, calm down. If you're the rich kid, that's great. We're adults, we can negotiate." He leaned in, whispering, "You like the kid that much?" "Fine. Sarah and I spent a lot raising her. A small assistance fee for our efforts cover a few small debts. And you can take her. I'll sign the papers." Daniel looked at him, a look of ultimate contempt. He cracked a cold smile, a smile that sent shivers down Mike's spine. He reached into his inner jacket pocket again. He pulled out a sleek black fountain pen. He pressed the clicker button on the top, then placed it gently beside the bracelet. The red light on the pen body went out. "Thank you for the offer," Daniel said. "I just recorded everything. Extortion and trafficking. Plus abandonment and endangerment. Congratulations, Mike. You just bought yourself a one-way ticket to prison." Mike froze. The piece of gum fell out of his mouth. The chief stood up and motioned. Two officers immediately approached, pulled Mike up, and twisted his hands behind his back. The sound of handcuffs locking was a dry clack. "No, I was kidding. Sarah, say something," Mike yelled as he was dragged toward the door. But Sarah said nothing. She collapsed onto the table, sobbing hysterically. She knew there was no turning back this time. Daniel turned to Lily. She sat there silently, watching everything from beginning to end. Her large eyes didn't blink. He didn't cover her eyes. He wanted her to see the greed of her stepfather, the weakness of her mother, to understand that she was not to blame, to stop nurturing any false hope that they would change. "Let's go, Lily," Daniel said, his voice softening completely. He lifted her up. Lily wrapped her arms around his neck, her face pressed into his shoulder, turning her back on her tragically sobbing mother. They walked out of the stuffy office. Sarah's arguments and blame and Mike's curses faded behind the closed door. Outside, the blinding midday sun of Nevada shone directly on their faces. Lily squinted from the glare. She took a deep breath. The air here smelled of dust and sunshine, but no longer of fear. Her small hand fumbled, then grasped Daniel's little finger tightly. A firm grasp. An absolute trust just rekindled from the ashes. Thunder rolled like the roar of a giant wounded beast shaking the double-paned windows of the Hollywood Hills mansion. Outside, lightning tore through the pitch-black night, casting long, distorted shadows of trees onto the newly painted pink wall of Lily's bedroom. Lily bolted awake. She sat up in bed, her chest heaving violently. Cold sweat drenched her, sticking to her pajamas. The nightmare had been terrifyingly real. She was back at the rest stop, sitting on the decaying wooden chair, surrounded by endless darkness and giant trucks barreling toward her, about to crush her, while her mother stood far away, smiling and waving goodbye. Mommy Lily screamed, her voice swallowed by a booming clap of thunder right over the roof. She curled up, pressing against the corner of the wall, clutching the brown teddy bear Daniel had bought her. Her eyes were wide, panicked, staring out the window where raindrops were whipping against the glass as if trying to shatter this fragile security. The bedroom door burst open. Warm yellow light from the hallway flooded in, chasing away the shadows on the wall. Daniel rushed into the room. He was hastily wearing a bathrobe, holding a small flashlight, his face etched with worry. He had heard her scream through the baby monitor placed in his study. "Lily, I'm here. I'm here." Seeing Daniel, the last wall of defense in Lily's heart collapsed. She stopped trying to be strong or well-behaved. She stopped stifling her cries to avoid bothering the adults. She burst into heart-wrenching sobs. She tossed the teddy bear aside, leapt out of bed, and ran toward Daniel. Her small bare feet hit the edge of the table, but she didn't care. Daniel quickly knelt on the wooden floor, opening his arms to catch her. Lily crashed into his embrace like a small bullet, burying her tear-soaked face into his chest. "Sir, I'm scared. I'm so scared." Daniel tightened his arms, fully embracing the small body that was shaking violently. He didn't say, "Don't be scared," or "Everything is fine," because he knew those lies were meaningless to a child who had just experienced trauma. He simply sat there in silence, one hand supporting the back of her head, the other gently patting her back in a steady rhythm. Thump, thump, thump. The rhythm of safety. Outside, the rain still poured down, but within Daniel's embrace, the storm seemed to halt at the threshold. 10 minutes passed. Lily's crying gradually turned into shaky sobs. She lifted her swollen eyes to look at Daniel. Her eyes were red, holding a pain too great for a 7-year-old. "Mr. Daniel." Her voice was faint. "I'm listening, Lily. If I were better behaved." She hesitated, her fingers twisting his bathrobe lapel. "If I ate less, didn't spill food, didn't ask for toys, would Mom come back for me?" The question was like a sharp knife, slicing directly into Daniel's heart. He felt a lump in his throat. It turned out that throughout the past week, despite living in luxury, eating well, and dressing nicely, this child had been tormenting herself. She still believed that her abandonment was punishment for some bad behavior on her part. Daniel lifted her face, using his thumb to wipe away the hot tears. He looked deep into her eyes, his gaze no longer that of a powerful billionaire, but of a man who had also experienced loss and regret. "Lily, listen to me," Daniel whispered, his voice firm and steady. "Look at me." Lily blinked, focusing on him intently. "A long time ago, I also had a family. I had a wife and a daughter about your age. I loved them very much, but I was always busy. I thought making a lot of money was the same as loving them. I missed my daughter's birthday, missed her school performance. I always came home after she was asleep." Daniel paused, swallowing the old pain that was resurfacing. "Then one day my wife took my daughter and left. She said I didn't need a family. I only needed money. I was very angry. I thought they didn't understand me. I thought they were wrong." Lily listened silently, her large eyes unblinking. "But I was wrong, Lily. I was the one who was wrong. Adults make mistakes too, even very big mistakes." He gently stroked her hair. "Your mom Sarah. She was wrong. Completely wrong. Her leaving you was not because you were bad. It wasn't because you ate too much or too little. It was because she wasn't good enough to be a mother. She chose the wrong path. Really, Sir Lily asked, her voice trembling with hope, more real than anything. You are not at fault for anything. You deserve to be loved, to be protected, to eat well, and sleep warm. Whether you are good or naughty, whether you break a vase or get the carpet dirty, you still deserve to be loved. Do you understand? Lily looked at Daniel. In the steady gaze of this strange man who was now more familiar than blood, she saw absolute sincerity. She felt the weight of his affirmation. It gently lifted the heavy stone that had been pressing down on her chest for so long. For the first time, she felt she was allowed to forgive herself. I understand, Sir Lily whispered, burying her head into Daniel's chest. I'm not bad. That's right, you are the best girl in the world. Daniel gently kissed her forehead. He felt her breathing gradually stabilize. Her body relaxed in his arms. The rain outside had subsided, leaving only the sound of dripping water on the eaves. The storm had passed. Lily closed her eyes. The exhaustion after the panic set in. She nestled into Daniel's sandalwood-scented shirt, listening to the steady thump-thump-thump of his heartbeat. It was the most peaceful sound she had ever heard. A little later, steady breathing could be heard. Lily was fast asleep. No nightmares could reach her tonight. Daniel gently lifted her and placed her back in the middle of the large bed. He pulled the blanket up to her chest, tucking the corners in tightly so the cold air couldn't sneak in. He picked up the teddy bear from the floor and placed it beside her. In her sleep, Lily fumbled, then hugged the bear tightly, a faint smile gracing her lips. Daniel didn't leave immediately. He pulled the armchair closer to the bed and sat down. He watched Lily's peaceful face in the dim nightlight. In his own heart, an old wound was also slowly closing. In rescuing this child from abandonment, he realized he was also being saved. Lily had filled the immense void in this cold mansion and in his own barren heart. He reached out and gently held her small hand, peeking out from under the blanket. The warmth from the child's hand spread to his own calloused one. Sleep well, my niece, Daniel whispered into the quiet air. From now on, no one will ever forget you again. 1 year later. It was still the blazing Arizona sun, still the asphalt road stretching endlessly to the horizon, but today the sky was unusually clear without the gloomy, oppressive atmosphere of that previous day. The sleek black Maybach slowly turned onto exit 40. Inside the car, the usual quiet and tension were gone. Instead, the cheerful melody of Happy played from the expensive surround sound system. Daniel Whitmore sat in the back holding an economic newspaper, but not reading a word. He was smiling, looking into the rearview mirror, observing the girl sitting next to him. Lily pressed her nose against the car window, her eyes sparkling as she looked at the familiar landscape rushing past. Look, Mr. Daniel, that giant cactus is still there, she exclaimed, pointing excitedly. Daniel folded the newspaper, adjusting his sunglasses. That's right. And this time we're stopping to say hello to it, not to wait. The car stopped in the familiar parking lot. The chauffeur, the same man from a year ago, stepped out and opened the door with a bright smile. Lily jumped out first. Her feet met the ground lightly and confidently. She was no longer the thin, huddled child in oversized clothes. Now Lily was visibly taller, her plump, rosy cheeks reflecting a vibrant life. Her hazel brown hair was neatly braided on both sides, adorned with a blue bow that perfectly matched the flared dress she was wearing. The tattered canvas shoes of the past had been replaced by pristine white sneakers. Daniel stepped out after her, taking a deep breath of the desert air. Oddly, he didn't feel the heat today. Come on, Lily turned back, offering her hand. Daniel took her small hand. Her hand was now warmer and fuller, no longer cold and bony like the first time he held it. They walked together toward the visitor rest area. But the old shabby scene of a year ago had completely vanished. In its place was a spectacular transformation. The decaying chipped wooden tables had been removed. On that very spot now stood a small, brightly colored playground, a yellow spiral slide red double swings and a whimsical zebra rocker. Under the canopy of a newly planted large oak tree, a row of neat, clean white granite benches were placed. Lily's eyes widened. "Wow, did you do all of this?" Sir Daniel shrugged, feigning modesty. "The foundation did it. I just signed the papers." He led Lily to the granite bench in the central position, exactly where the old wooden table had stood. This bench was special. A small, gleaming brass plaque was attached to the backrest. Daniel pointed to the plaque. "Can you read it?" Lily bent down, sounding out each word fluently, no longer hesitant as she was when Daniel first hired a tutor for her. "For those who are waiting, you are not forgotten." She finished reading and looked up at Daniel. Her eyes were shimmering. She understood the meaning. This wasn't just a bench. It was Daniel's promise to her and to all the children who might accidentally wander here, that someone would always come, someone would always remember. "It's beautiful, Mr. Daniel." Lily whispered, her finger lightly tracing the raised inscription. Now for the most important part. Daniel clapped his hands, breaking the quiet moment. "Who wants ice cream?" Lily raised her hand high. "All right, here's your mission. I want a vanilla chocolate cone. Can you go buy it yourself?" Easy peasy. Lily took the $10 bill Daniel handed her and ran off toward the mobile ice cream cart parked nearby. Daniel leaned against the stone bench, crossing his arms and watching her small back. A year ago, she had to ask permission to drink water. Today, she stood among a crowd of children, confidently pushing her way into the line, holding her head high as she told the vendor, "I'll take the 2 biggest cones, please, lots of sprinkles." Her voice was clear and ringing, echoing across the corner of the lot. No more hesitation, no more fear, no more furtive glances to see if anyone was scolding her. Lily was truly healed, and so was Daniel. Watching her smile, he felt the scars of his own past beginning to fade. 5 minutes later, Lily returned, both hands clutching 2 giant ice cream cones that were already beginning to melt in the sun. She grinned widely, revealing a gap where a baby tooth had recently been replaced. "Here you go, sir. I asked the man to add extra sprinkles." Daniel took his cone, leaning down so Lily could stand on her toes to wipe the streak of melted ice cream from his lip. "Thank you, my daughter," he said, the words slipping out so naturally that even he was surprised. Lily paused for a second, then her smile grew even brighter. She didn't say anything, just moved closer, resting her head on his arm, sucking on her ice cream while swinging her feet to the rhythm of some children's song playing in her head. The man and his niece sat there eating ice cream in the busy rest stop. Cars still came and went rapidly. People were still rushing on their journeys, but in this small corner, time seemed to stand still. He looked out at the vast highway ahead. A year ago, this road was a nightmare, a path to abandonment. But now, under the bright yellow sun, it stretched like a ribbon leading to the future. A future with Lily, with parent-teacher meetings, with camping trips, and with a true family. Done superstar Daniel asked when he saw Lily lick the last of her cone. "Yes, sir," full up Lily patted her belly. "Then let's go. Las Vegas is waiting. How about we go see Cirque du Soleil tonight?" "Yeah, see the circus." Lily jumped up and down. She took Daniel's hand, pulling him up. Her tug was strong, full of life energy. She chattered about the acts she wanted to see, about how she would tell her classmates. Her clear laughter echoed, overpowering the roar of the truck engines. They walked toward the car. Daniel opened the door for Lily to climb in, then walked around to the other side. Before stepping into the car, he looked back at the playground and the stone bench one last time. The afternoon sun cast long shadows on the ground, but they were no longer the shadows of loneliness. They were shadows of peace. The car door closed. The Maybach slowly began to roll, merging into the hurried traffic on Interstate 40. It became smaller and smaller, finally disappearing beyond the sun-drenched horizon. The rest stop remained behind. Other children were playing on the new slide, A few travelers rested on the stone bench, with the brass inscription smiling as they read it. This place was no longer a symbol of abandonment. It had become a rest stop of affection, the starting point of real-life fairy tales. And the desert wind continued to blow, but now it carried a whisper of hope. Family is not just a bond of blood, but a choice of love. Sometimes those who leave us teach us how to be strong, but it is those who stop for us who teach us the true meaning of life. Never lose hope, because somewhere on this long journey, a peaceful rest stop is always waiting for you. Note, the story above is entirely fictional. Character names, locations, and events have been created for the purpose of illustrating an educational and artistic message. Any resemblance to real people or actual events is purely coincidental.